Hi folks, hope you're all well out there still. I know it's been a good couple of weeks since I did my last video, and oh, that sounds like a confession, but I've been diving pretty deeply into a lot of radio work, and I've had a few things I've been setting up and trying out on servers. And I also did a post recently about MeshCentral, and if you're not following my blog, you must consider that I do post about 4 or 5 articles per day about interesting tech, and I don't always do a video about them, but sometimes there's a lot of interest around a particular item, like for example this MeshCentral post. I had quite a few people come back and say they found it really interesting. So although I'd not installed it myself yet, I thought, you know what, let me install it. And partly that's what today's video is about, because I struggled probably for about a good day and a half to try and get right that the agents that you install on your Raspberry Pi or whatever the case is could actually see MeshCentral and talk to it properly and connect. And the video is going to be partly about just what the issue there was and how I managed to solve it. But what I should maybe to start off with is, what is MeshCentral, for those that didn't actually see the post. It is a dashboard, a cross-platform dashboard, so you can run it on Windows or Linux or even from a Raspberry Pi, and it basically allows you to manage and control a whole bunch of other devices, whether they are Linux desktops, servers, Windows machines, Raspberry Pis, anything really. And the real interesting part about it is the absolute simplicity about getting those devices set up, because once you've got your server set up, it just gives you a custom script per device that you basically drop in and execute on the command line, and that's it. You leave it. It just pops up as an agent and it's ready to run inside your dashboard, sort of all configured and ready to go. So I think that's one of the real attractive things about this. What I can just say is, okay, so this is just the website. I'm not going to go through the website. I'm not going to do a whole how to install it or anything either. It's really going to be more just a bit of an overview today, and then what my challenge was and sort of how I fixed it. And you'll also see, by the way, how I'm using my Obsidian notes that I did in my previous video. So that is let's go and have a look at at my site. So this is my MeshCentral server, and it's running off one of my servers inside the house. I didn't actually run it as a container. I realized much later that there is a sort of a containerized version of it, but it doesn't really matter. I set it up on the server. It listens on port 444, and I'm just using my reverse proxy server to point to it. So it doesn't really matter where it's running in the house. Essentially, you can set up sort of groups for devices. So I've got one group here called desktop, which is my desktop and a Lounge Media PC desktop. I've got a group called Raspberry Pi, and I've got my ham radio Pi running in it, and I've got the OpenWebRx device that I'm running for ham radio. And then I've just got servers, and I've got my home Open Media Vault server, and I have got Host World VPS that I'm running as well. And yeah, there's obviously some my account settings. You can see I've got the two-factor authentication active. It just shows you an overview of your groups. You can set your own logo, shows you events that have been running, and that is sort of part of my problem I'll come back to as well. You can also then go in and out of files, so you can copy files from one device to another quite seamlessly as well. You've got any users that you've set up for managing the MeshCentral, so you can obviously have 3 or 4 users that maybe manage your Raspberry Pis and some other users that manage your servers at the office or something like that. This is open source software, but I think if you want to use their cloud version of it, you pay for that service. Yes, so this is the self-hosted free version. And yeah, there's basically that, and there's a couple of stats you can see. These are the times I've rebooted and had the server on and off, so that's why it's got some blanks there. That's the console on the server, I think. I think you've got to type in over there. It's interesting. And you've got a trace as well. I see some of these. Let me just check. Sometimes, oh yeah, there are reports and there are things you can generate as well, reports and so on. So if I was to maybe have a look, say, at our Lounge Media PC, that's the sort of the view that you're going to see. You're going to see how long it's been on and off for the last couple of days. You can also set alerts under your notifications to notify you when a device goes disconnected or it connects as well. You've got a couple of things you can do to it. Just wake up, run commands, set it to sleep, power it off, uninstall the agent. You've got notes you can make about the item. You can set your own log event. You can set a message on that device as well. So that's quite handy if you've got machines sitting all over the place. You want to let people know that you're going to be powering it down or doing things. It has also got a whole chat-based service as well that opens up a two-way chat, and it can even go as far, if it's a desktop PC with WebRTC, it can even open up a video session as well. You can create a link to share this device with a guest as well. And let me just see, I suppose I can see if I can set up a message. I want to go to the screen just now anyway. I'll just say test there. Then you can go to the desktop view, which you can connect, and you will see the actual screen. So it's on screensaver at the moment, and there you'll see the message that I just sent just now. It's popped up on that user's screen, and they can say yes or no or whatever the case is. Let me just disconnect. So that will allow you obviously to manage. It's like a remote RDP or a VNC type session. You can fully manage that computer as if you're sitting at the screen and the keyboard. You can jump to the terminal if you want to, and then run commands on it, I suppose, like whatever. I'm just sitting in a subdirectory there. You can then also connect to it and browse, as I said, files, that sort of thing. You can copy, delete, move, zip files, all that sort of thing. These are the last couple of events that happened for it. You can also see a lot more details about the actual computer as well. And then there's just a console view as well. So yeah, so basically from there you could take control of the computers, you can go run updates, you can do whatever. I suppose the advantage really being that you've got one management sort of console here where you can really access all your computers and do everything. You don't have to jump in and out of different applications and so on. Yeah, anything. Okay, and then the other thing I can just show you, last thing maybe, is if you want to add an agent, you add it to a particular group. So you stand on that group and you say to it, add an agent. The reason why is because it'll actually appear already inside that group, ready to go. So you could say, is it going to be for a Windows computer, a Linux computer, a Linux binary installer, Apple OS, a mobile device, which I think is Android only at the moment, MeshCentral Assistant, Windows, those are the uninstall commands. So if you said, for example, Linux, you literally say copy over here, you paste it into the command line on the other side, and it literally comes up and it appears immediately inside the dashboard here. That's it, nothing more, nothing, you don't have to do anything else. You'll see it's already configured, already set up with all the commands and everything it needs to validate and check certificates and so on to actually appear there. So yeah, that really is sort of my overview of MeshCentral, I think. So let's go and have a look at the problem that I actually had. So I've shown this diagram before in a previous video where I did my hosting from home, and essentially part of the problem here really is that you're coming in through something like, in my case, I'm getting a domain verification done through Cloudflare. So Cloudflare is providing the SSL certificate. It's then routing through my router into the server and then off to wherever the MeshCentral server is sitting. The problem we've got is that when the agent tries to connect, it's not getting the correct hash from the SSL certificate. What it's doing is it's picking up from the certificate that's on the MeshCentral server that itself generates. And if I'm saying to it, no, but we are coming through an Nginx Proxy Manager, which has got SSL as well, then it is picking up a hash from over there. And this is now causing problems. So what happens is these little agents that you try to install, they are not connecting through and they're not being seen on the MeshCentral side. You'll get a message actually saying it's blocking the agent because the SSL hash is not matching. So partly the problem was to point it to here to go and get the hash of the SSL certificate there so that it matches. And then the other problem was that the ports, by default, you already have got your port 443 bound through your Nginx Proxy Manager over here. So 443 and 80 belong to this. So the MeshCentral server can't use 443, which is fine. You can use 444. But then the problem is that when you're on this server at port 444 and you're saying to it generate a certificate for the agent, or generate that script, sorry, from the agent, it's trying to point back to 444, and that doesn't work, because now when it goes to the domain name and it adds 444 and it comes in here to Nginx Proxy Manager, that rejects 444. It says, I don't recognize it. I only recognize 443. So there is a way to trick the agents so that when they generate and they're set up, they're actually going to be generating using the domain name out here with 443. And that is actually the way that it'll come through here. Then just as a plain SSL, it'll just see the domain name with the 443, which is fine. Nginx Proxy Manager will accept it. It sees the domain name and it says, you want to go to MeshCentral, and it sends it through. End of problem. And then everything's working very nicely. But the problem was that I took a long time to try to figure out how this was actually working. So what I want to do now is I want to show you, I'm going to run through the notes that I did using Obsidian. The reason is actually that I've always been using these notes whenever I'm sitting with something new that I'm figuring out. I find it very useful to actually create a new note in whatever note manager I'm using, and I document everything that I'm doing with links and text snippets and all the rest of it. So if I have to go and refresh myself 6 months or a year later, or I need to do a video for YouTube, then I've got all my notes as to what I had to do to fix it and sort it out. So I might as well actually use the notes themselves to go through this a little bit, and you can see how I'm using Obsidian at the moment. I was using a different note maker before, and I know my last video was about Obsidian notes, but yeah, it brings over all my other notes, and this is how I'm using it. So I've got a couple of links to where I got my notes from and what I was following and where the user guide is and what the default port is to start it up. There's some videos and so on that I followed as well to help get things going and just get my initial setup going. And everything worked. So I'm not going to go through this detail too much actually. There was this thing you had to set up for ports below 1025, but that's all in the setup notes and so on. That's just so that you can bind to port 444. The config file. Okay, so this is the part we have to look at. The config file for MeshCentral is stored in the, I'm using the example of a Linux server because most people are going to probably set it up using a Raspberry Pi or a Linux server or VPS in the cloud or whatever. So it's under the home directory. If you follow the instructions as to how they tell you what to do, you'd create basically a subdirectory called MeshCentral, and inside that is another subdirectory, MeshCentral-data, and there's a file there called config.json. That is the main config file. So partly what I had to look at was I had to put let me just show you what the config file looks like. It's basically a sort of a JSON file like this, and you'll see there's a settings part with basically a whole lot of parameters that are being configured over here. Just bear in mind that where there's a little dash before it, it's a place marker there, but it's essentially it sees that as a commented out. So if you want to make use, like WAN only had a dash in front of it, I take it out to set it for WAN only. But I had to add a line called AliasPort 443, and I mentioned that just now. This basically will indicate, regardless of what port MeshCentral server itself is using, because look, I'm basically be using port 444 for the server, it's going to tell the agents that they must assume to use port 443, which is a standard port for SSL, because that'll get through the Nginx proxy. It's used externally for agents looking for it, especially if you have something like a reverse proxy with 443 already on the domain name. So I've already mentioned that Nginx Proxy Manager binds already 443 and 80. So now if the agents are looking for that URL, they will essentially append 443 onto the name of the domain name, and that allows Nginx Proxy Manager to accept it and to route it through to the MeshCentral server. So that's a key thing to set for your agents if you are going to be making use of a public domain name for your MeshCentral. Obviously, if you run this purely as LAN only and everything is inside the LAN, that's fine. You don't really have to worry with anything I'm talking about, quite honestly. But I am managing also a VPS server that's outside on the internet. And if I had other machines out there on the internet, then the point is that I have to resolve through a public domain name. And this is the way that you would do it. So even stuff on the inside of my LAN, it's basically looking out to the public domain name and coming in on this port. So this will allow the visibility of the agents to get through your Nginx reverse proxy and to basically arrive at the server. Then the other thing was, once I got that set up, what had happened was it was installing fine, but nothing appeared inside the MeshCentral dashboard. It just never came up, even though they installed fine, no errors, nothing. It said it connected and so on. What I'd noticed was, though, when I started up the MeshCentral server manually, still on the command line, especially while I was doing all the diagnosis and that sort of thing. I saw a lot of messages coming up saying agent bad web certificate hash, with a bit of extra text there. And essentially what really happening was what I said earlier there, that it was coming through to Nginx Proxy. It was pointing it to the server, fine. It gets to the server, but MeshCentral does its own checks to make sure that agent that's coming through, is it actually the validated agent passing correctly through all the SSL pattern matching and hashing? And no, it wasn't. It was picking up a mismatch on the certificate hash. So what I actually had to do there was, well, there's two things you can do. You can bypass the hash, which is not a good idea. That's not very secure. And the other thing you can do is tell MeshCentral to actually pull its certificate from elsewhere. So let's just start. This video, by the way, over here is the dev's own video. I'll put the link below the videos in this video as well. He goes into a lot more detail about this around the Nginx reverse proxy, but the one big difference is he's using the sort of text-based, I think, Nginx reverse proxy. I am using something called Nginx Proxy Manager, which is a GUI. You can see here it's a GUI-based proxy manager. So you don't have the ease of following those commands step by step. So if you're also running your Nginx Proxy Manager in its own little container in a GUI type environment, then this is what I did basically. I edited a new proxy host in the GUI. I told it to use this address that I'm using for the validation and for the MeshCentral server. And what I'm doing is, when it comes into Nginx Proxy, I'm telling it to point to this IP address, which is where the server is sitting, the MeshCentral server, and point it to port 444 on that server. The reason why is because that's the port number that MeshCentral is listening to. And very important, make sure you've got WebSocket support activated as well, because without that, it's not going to do some of the resolving. Then this error that I talked about here, you'll see that when you're starting the MeshCentral server from the CLI. So the one thing you don't want it to do is you don't want MeshCentral to try and do its SSL pattern hashing and so on from the Nginx Proxy Manager. So in the settings file for MeshCentral, that is now, you do set something called this TLS offload, so that the IP forwarding headers will be trusted from our reverse proxy. Otherwise, it's got an issue with that as well. So because Nginx Proxy Manager is already doing the checking of all the incoming traffic. So you'll see, where did I put it now? TLS offload. Ah, there we go. TLS offload, and I'm saying to it which TLS offload to trust, and I'm putting in the IP address of my Nginx Proxy Manager over there. So that's the container's IP address, the internal address for the container. You'll see the other option I talked about where you could just bypass all the checking is this one over here. Ignore agent hash check true. I've commented it out at the moment, but I did that initially as well just to see, it is connecting and working. Now I know that, what the issue is sort of thing, and I re-enabled this again. So yeah, what you need is, if you've got Nginx Proxy Manager, you want to use this TLS offload and you want to point it to the IP address of your Proxy Manager. Then the other important part is where to now get the certificate hash properly. Because mine is being generated on Cloudflare externally, you can't point it to a specific IP address or anything there. So it's not actually very complicated. A bit further down in the config file is a section also called domains. And you just need to add one parameter or line over there. It's this one, the cert URL. And you want to put into it there the fully qualified domain name, which is that https mesh.gadgetierza, whatever you're going to be using, and obviously also the port 443 over there. And what will now happen is that whenever an agent tries to connect and there's some problem with a mismatch on the hash, this line will tell MeshCentral to go there and quickly go and pull the SSL certificate and get a new hash, and it then should match the hash that the agent is coming in on as well. So essentially, once you've done that as well, then that error that's coming up about the bad mismatch of the pattern for the SSL cert should actually go away as well. There was just one last little issue, and I haven't actually solved this, by the way, but I found this quite interesting because I found out something else I can do with Nginx Proxy Manager. The one thing that is not working is that under the events, if you look at that events log, it's supposed to show you each and every internal IP address of the agent so that you can see where's the agent actually coming from. Now, the problem I'm sitting with at the moment is, and I'm not sure, maybe I have fixed it and it just doesn't work for internal IPs, but certainly in my case, it's only showing the public IP address for my home router. That is the address it's showing for all the internal agents. I don't know why, but it is resolving correctly for external addresses. So my VPS server, for example, it's got its own public IP address outside. It is showing correctly. So I'm not sure if this has worked. I thought it was supposed to work for the internal addresses. It could be that I'm forcing everything in WAN mode and forcing everything to go out through the public domain name and back in. I haven't mixed this really with with WAN and LAN. So it could be that if I either force it into a LAN mode, or if I can get the hybrid mode right, maybe it'll resolve right. It's not worrying me too much at this stage because I've got everything set up correctly. But just as a matter of interest, these were in the video that the dev did, these were the lines that he said you should add to set the proxy header for the IP traffic coming in. But you needed to do it in Nginx Proxy's config file. So the problem was that file is managed by my GUI, so I can't go and edit that file manually, although I did just have a look at it to go and verify. So there is a way, though, that you can do it. And I thought initially is that when you edit a proxy host like this, you would go to advanced, and they've got a space there where you can put in a whole lot of custom commands, but those are specific ones. It does say there specifically that if you want to do set headers for proxy and that type of thing, sorry, you can't do it in there. You've got to do it in custom locations. So this may be of interest to some. As I said, I didn't know about this until now, or how to do it, should I say. So really what you do is you go to edit the proxy host that you've set up for the MeshCentral server, and normally you just work under details. You'll go to custom locations, and you need to take a location with a root symbol like this, just a /. You will then put in HTTP normally, because remember you said that TLS off overrider you had already set, so you're not pointing it to HTTPS anymore for the server. It'll be HTTP, the server's IP address again, that same port 444, and then you click over here on the gear symbol, and you can copy those lines, or the lines you need to put in. Once you've clicked on that, this part opens up over here. And all you do now is you paste those commands in there with the little semicolons on the ends of the line. And you can say save. It's basically created this as a custom location, a root location there of the URL. And once you've said save, what you'll find is that if you go and open up the Nginx proxy configuration file, you'll actually see that this has been inserted. So I'm not quite sure why maybe mine is not working properly. I'll have to maybe dig a little bit deeper, or maybe somebody can suggest why. But just as a matter of interest, that is where you set this sort of thing in the GUI version of the Nginx Proxy Manager. So yeah, that's really sort of it actually. You can see I'm using my Obsidian notes profusely. I've got little quick jumps over here. You can jump to your parts, but let's not rehash the whole of Obsidian, I suppose. So yeah, that is really then MeshCentral. You know, if you want to use it, like I said, this will at least maybe help you if you've got to get around that problem of how do I get it to work, or how do I get it to connect behind using something like Nginx Proxy Manager. So yeah, I hope you found that of interest. Other thing I've been delving into a lot this week has been around a new dashboard. I'm thinking of moving off Heimdall, that I've been using a long time, as my dashboard. That is my dashboard for sort of a landing page, jumping quickly to all my various self-hosted services and so on. I'm looking at the moment at something called Dashy, and it's actually quite exciting in terms of really being a very active project, going into a lot of interesting customizations and things you can do with Dashy, and how it also integrates with something called Glances, which is a performance manager which you'd normally view just sort of full screen as a sort of a CLI type thing. But they've got widgets in Dashy that actually pull the data through. So it's been quite interesting, and that's the last week or two I've been spending looking at MeshCentral and Dashy. So the next video should actually be a video about Dashy. But yeah, okay, I hope MeshCentral was of a little bit of interest to you, and yeah, enjoy it out there, and I'll see you in the next video.